Welcome to Tales by Tom. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this gripping story that will leave you on the edge of your seat. It left me speechless. When a seasoned officer pulls over a car on a quiet suburban night, she's not expecting more than a routine stop. But as she steps closer, she sees a frightened child clutching a cherished cap, a look of silent terror etched across his face. In that moment, she senses something is horribly wrong. Before we dive into this story of courage, deception, and the fight for the innocent, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe in protecting those who cannot protect themselves, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Now let's get on with the tale. The night was unusually calm as Officer Carla Jackson guided her patrol car through the winding streets of Willow Bend, a place so tranquil that her mind kept flicking to the half-written reports waiting on her desk back at the station. The hum of her cruiser's engine and the distant crackle of her radio were the only sounds as she scanned for any sign of activity. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 8:39 p.m. Not late enough for the entire town to be asleep, but quiet enough to feel unnerving. Carla had been on the force for 7 years, long enough to learn that an easy shift could transform in an instant. Even so, her focus drifted momentarily. She thought of her old academy mentor who used to warn her about letting her guard down on slow nights. "Stillness breeds surprises, Jackson," he would say. She had brushed it off back then, but a few tough incidents had convinced her he was right. Every corner turned or intersection passed might reveal something that changed everything. It happened at the next stop sign. Carla noticed a dark sedan rolling through without pausing. She shook her head, lips tightening in mild exasperation. Though Willow Bend was quiet, traffic infractions still needed addressing. She flicked on her lights. The driver slowed, pulling over just beyond a small parked RV. Carla radioed in the stop, her voice steady and calm. "This is Officer Jackson, stopping a dark sedan, license plate 3X4Y162, she said, giving her location. "Routine traffic stop, no assistance needed at this time." She tucked the radio back in place. Stepping out of her cruiser, she felt the cool air brush across her cheeks. The night seemed starless, lights from the street lamps giving the entire block a soft orange glow. Her boots crunched on the asphalt as she approached the driver's side window. Despite having done this 100 times, she felt the usual flicker of adrenaline. She kept a hand near her holstered gun, just in case, while letting her other arm fall in a relaxed posture. The window rolled down smoothly, revealing a man who looked to be in his mid-40s. Sharp haircut, crisp jacket, and an unsettling smile that flickered more than it shone. Carla scanned his features, searching for small details, the tension around his mouth, the slight tremor in his voice when he greeted her. "Evening, officer," he said. "Something wrong?" "Evening," Carla replied. "You went through that stop sign back there. Any reason for the rush?" The man chuckled in a friendly but somehow forced way. "I'm so sorry. Must have been distracted. It's late and I'm just trying to get us home." Carla leaned slightly to get a view into the back seat. That was when she saw the boy. He was about 7 or 8, small for his age, with tousled dark hair. He wore a jacket that seemed one size too big, as though it belonged to an older sibling. On his lap, he clutched a simple, faded baseball cap, the kind local youth teams hand out at the start of a season. His grip was so tight that the brim was bent nearly in half. The child glanced at Carla, then at the driver as if seeking permission to speak. The subdued fear that lingered in his expression put Carla on edge. She forced a neutral tone while addressing him. "Hey there, bud. You doing okay tonight?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the driver interjected before the boy could speak. "He's just tired. We were visiting my mother for dinner, and it ran late. Isn't that right, Ethan?" The child, Ethan, nodded once. A small, rigid nod that appeared more compelled than genuine. Carla's eyes narrowed. She had a knack for reading body language, and the tension in the boy's posture felt off. He pressed back against the seat like he wished to disappear into it. "Let's see your license and registration," Carla said, shifting her attention back to the man in the driver's seat. He obliged with an almost too eager compliance, handing over the documents with a polite flourish. "Name's Anthony Brown," he said. "And this is my nephew, Ethan. I help out with him a lot since his folks are busy." "We're headed to Maplewood, just off Cedar Lane." Carla scanned the license and registration. On paper, everything matched up. Anthony Brown, a local address in Willow Bend. Registered vehicle, no obvious flags. At a glance, it was all in order. Yet the subtle sheen of sweat on Anthony's forehead, the slight tremor in his hands, made Carla's stomach clench. The boy in the back seat clutched the baseball cap so tightly that Carla saw his knuckles had turned white. Every now and then, Ethan would glance at Anthony, as if carefully monitoring how the man reacted to each question Carla asked. Carla forced a polite smile, though her nerves were alight with suspicion. "Everything looks fine here. Be more careful at those stop signs, Mr. Brown. They're there for a reason." "Yes, officer." "Absolutely." Anthony offered that same controlled grin, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the rearview mirror, as though checking on Ethan. Before stepping away, Carla looked the boy squarely in the eyes. "Get some rest, Ethan," she said gently. "Night drives can be tough on kids." He nodded again, lips pressed firmly together, not daring to speak in front of Anthony. There was something deeply unsettling in the silence. But without a concrete reason to escalate, Carla knew she had to let them go. She returned Anthony's documents, watching him with a practiced composure. Then she stepped back from the sedan, offering the customary nod that indicated they were free to leave. Anthony pulled away, merging back onto the quiet suburban road. Carla watched them disappear into the darkness, a knot forming in her chest. Something about that entire exchange felt wrong. Returning to her cruiser, Carla sat behind the wheel, the engine idling as she replayed every detail. She saw Ethan's tense shoulders, the fear in his eyes, Anthony's jumpiness. She didn't want to be paranoid, but her gut screamed that this was no ordinary family errand. She flipped open a small notebook she kept by the console and jotted down the sedan's license plate, 3X4Y162. The blank lines on the page seemed to underscore how little she actually knew about them. But experience told her not to ignore that gut feeling. She scribbled a quick note. Ethan, 7 to 8 years old, seemed scared. Anthony Brown, suspicious demeanor. Claimed to be heading to Maplewood. She tore off the page, tucking it in her vest pocket. Then she eased back into traffic, glancing at the clock again, 8:49 p.m. The shift had only just begun. When Carla arrived at the station later, it was nearly 9:30, and the place had the muffled hush of a mostly empty building. A few officers typed away on computers, finishing up paperwork for the night. Carla gave them a nod as she passed, making her way to her desk. She tried to focus on the half-finished reports in front of her, but images of Ethan kept crowding out other thoughts. The way he'd barely moved, the way his eyes spoke volumes more than his words could have, and how Anthony had preempted the boys every chance to speak. After a restless few minutes, Carla logged into her workstation and pulled up the department's database. She typed in Anthony Brown's license plate and personal information. Perhaps he was squeaky clean, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The system returned the basics. Local resident, no arrests, no outstanding warrants, no child endangerment or custody disputes on record. On paper, Anthony Brown was just another suburban guy. Carla frowned, drumming her fingers against the desk. She clicked through screen after screen, rummaging for any red flags that might support her intuition, but the results were empty. She sighed, feeling a tiny pang of self-doubt. Maybe she really had overthought it. Still, she opened the dash cam footage from her cruiser. The angle was grainy, the audio muffled, but she could see the moment she approached the driver's window. She fast-forwarded to the scene with Ethan in the frame, her gaze locked on his expression. Even in low resolution, the boy's eyes held a quiet desperation. Carla replayed it. At one point, when Anthony turned to face Ethan, the boy seemed to mouth something. She wasn't positive, but it looked like help. A chill prickled her arms as she paused the footage, pressing her face closer to the screen, then rewinding to watch again. She blinked as she realized it was more than her imagination. He was whispering a silent plea. She'd missed it in real time, overshadowed by the routine of checking documents. Suddenly, Carla's sense of foreboding crystallized into urgent alarm. She glanced around the precinct, half expecting her colleagues to share her shock, but the night shift was too preoccupied with their own tasks. Heart-hammering, Carla tapped into the state's missing children alerts. She scanned photos and descriptions, her anxiety skyrocketing the longer she searched. Then she saw it, an Amber Alert from 3 days ago for a missing boy named Ethan Morales, age 7, last seen in a park about 50 miles from Willow Bend. The child's photo matched the boy in the dashcam footage almost perfectly, the same slight build, the same brown hair, the same heartbreak in his eyes. He had disappeared while playing with friends after a little league game. Witnesses reported a dark car leaving the area. No solid leads had surfaced since. For a moment, Carla felt pinned to her chair by cold realization. She had let them drive away. If that was truly the missing Ethan in Anthony Brown's car, time was ticking. She called out to the one other officer she trusted for a second opinion, a younger patrolman named Joel Kim. Kim, she beckoned, voice shaky. Take a look at this. He ambled over, coffee mug in hand, and bent to peer at Carla's screen. As soon as he saw the missing persons report, the color in his face drained. That's the kid you pulled over? Carla nodded. I think so. He was with a man who claims to be his uncle, but the vibe was beyond wrong. I need to run this through our larger database. Do it, Joel said, setting his mug down. I'll let the lieutenant know we might have an active lead on a kidnapped child. Carla's hands shook with the adrenaline coursing through her. She typed rapidly, cross-referencing the number on Anthony's registration with a broader multi-state database. She found scattered mentions of his name in notes from other jurisdictions. Brown had once been interviewed in a missing child case in a neighboring county, but never charged. Another time, he was seen in the vicinity of a playground from where a child vanished, but there was no direct proof linking him to the crime. When the final search result flicked across her screen, Carla felt her throat tighten. There were references, unofficial and incomplete, hinting Anthony Brown might be connected to a ring involved in abducting children for illegal purposes. Nothing had stuck, no arrests made, but the pattern was unmistakable. Carla slammed her laptop shut. She grabbed her phone, stepping away from the hum of computers to make a call to dispatch. This is Officer Carla Jackson. I need an APB on a dark sedan, license plate 3X4Y162, possibly traveling with a kidnapped minor. The boy's name is Ethan Morales, 7 years old, missing out of Portwood. The suspect's name is Anthony Brown. We need immediate cooperation from all local agencies and state patrol. Even the dispatch operators sounded taken aback as they affirmed they would send out the alert. Carla's chest clenched. She couldn't help replaying the moment she said goodbye to them in her mind. The lingering handshake with the license and registration, Ethan's quiet nod. She mentally berated herself for not trusting her gut sooner, although deep down she knew she hadn't had enough to detain them at the time. Across the room, her phone vibrated with an incoming text. Joel had messaged a question. Did you find a possible direction of travel? Carla bit her lip, remembering Anthony mentioning Maplewood. She typed back, might be heading to Maplewood, near Cedar Lane. Could be a lie. Let's see if any cameras picked up their route. Though it was late, Carla's mind blazed with the urgency of the hunt. Minutes passed like hours as she rattled calls between dispatch and the traffic camera operators in Willow Bend, hoping to find a trace of Anthony's sedan. Meanwhile, an anxiety loop kept spinning in her head. Ethan is in danger. I should have known earlier. The phone on her desk rang, a shrill jolt in the still air. She snatched it up. Officer Jackson, she answered, forcing calm into her voice. Carla, it's Troy McDonald, came the voice of her detective partner, sounding brisk. I got your email. The Amber Alert from Portwood PD matches your boy, Ethan Morales. Just saw the dash cam snippet you sent. He definitely mouthed, help me. You need me at the station? She exhaled shakily. Yes. We need to coordinate with Portwood PD. The suspect might be working with others. The name Anthony Brown has come up in a few child disappearance leads but no convictions. Troy was silent a moment. Send me everything you've got. I'm on my way. We'll keep the search contained for now but move fast. Carla's hand clenched around the phone. Hurry. They ended the call. Carla sank back in her chair, scanning the half-finished reports on her desk that suddenly seemed so trivial. Ethan was all that mattered. She rubbed her palms over her face, ignoring the burning dryness in her eyes. She'd never been a parent, but the thought of a child going missing ignited a fierce protectiveness in her. In that moment, she swore to herself she'd move heaven and earth to find him. 40 minutes later, Detective MacDonald arrived, still in casual clothes. He looked rumpled, hair tousled like he'd been reviewing case files all day. He set down a paper cup of coffee, already half empty, and nudged Carla gently aside from her computer so he could go through the search logs. He noticed her fidgeting. "Hey, we'll figure this out," he said, giving her a sideways glance that carried unspoken sympathy. "Let's start by searching traffic cams. We can see if Brown's sedan was recorded leaving Willow Bend or heading into Maplewood." She nodded wordlessly, letting him take the lead. Troy had more investigative experience, especially with missing children. While he typed, Carla paced behind him, occasionally stopping to watch the screen load. She could still picture Ethan with that bent baseball cap in his lap. "Got something?" Troy said, pointing at a grainy video feed from a camera near Willow Bend's Main Street. "That's a dark sedan. License plate looks about right, crossing onto Pine Drive. Timestamp is 8:59 p.m. That's just a few minutes after your traffic stop." Carla leaned in. "So, he was heading west, possibly out of town?" Troy typed another command to check the next camera on that route. They found a partial match near the old industrial park. Then the trail went cold. The map displayed a half-dozen potential roads Anthony could have taken. Each led deeper into the rural outskirts, eventually connecting to highways or smaller towns. "Which direction do we search?" Carla muttered, frustration welling up. Troy frowned, tapping his pen against the desk. If Brown's connected to a larger ring, he may have a safe house or accomplice somewhere local. Or maybe he's leaving the county entirely. Hard to say. But we have the APB out. Let's do a direct check on any addresses linked to him. On it? Carla pulled up the address on the registration, 704 Rowan Street. Troy signaled for one of the night shift officers to go check out that location, but they all knew if Brown had any sense, he'd never go back home while the police were after him. As midnight approached, the precinct buzzed with more activity than usual. Officers from different departments called in tips. A waitress at a 24-hour diner near the county line reported seeing a man and a boy who fit the descriptions. She'd only noticed because the boy seemed anxious and knocked over a glass of soda, prompting an angry scolding from the man. Carla and Troy locked onto the lead immediately. "She said they left about half an hour ago," the dispatcher reported. "They seemed to be in a hurry." The man paid in cash. Carla grabbed her jacket. "That diner is only 15 minutes from here if traffic is light." Troy was already heading for the door, car keys in hand. "Let's go." They hopped into an unmarked police sedan, leaving the rest of the night crew to coordinate with other units. As Carla drove, Troy rummaged through a sheaf of notes. They had a rough description of Anthony Brown's build, possible vehicle changes, he might ditch the plates or switch cars, if he had the resources, and the possibility he was armed. The tension in the car felt like a live wire, thrumming with the gravity of saving a child from an unknown fate. Carla's phone buzzed again. She half expected another diner tip, but it was an automated update from the state's missing children system, Amber Alert Extended. A grim reminder that Ethan was still out there. Troy glanced at Carla's stiff posture. "You doing okay?" "I let him drive away," she said, voice tight. "What if we don't catch him in time?" Troy's gaze softened. He didn't offer cheap reassurance. "We're doing everything we can. If not for you trusting your instincts, we'd have no lead at all." She gave a thin smile of gratitude, keeping her focus on the empty road ahead. Red tail lights from sporadic cars cut streaks through the darkness. The trees on either side loomed tall, crowding the road like silent watchers. Carla resisted the urge to press the accelerator too far past the limit, aware a reckless accident now could ruin any chance of getting to Ethan. When they reached the diner, a tired-looking woman in a grease-stained apron stepped outside and flagged them down. She introduced herself as Lucy, the waitress who had phoned in the tip. "They were sitting in that booth near the window," Lucy explained, pointing inside. "The man did most of the talking. I heard him telling the kid to keep it together. Seemed real harsh. The kid barely said a word." Carla and Troy exchanged a tense glance. Did you happen to see which direction they left in? Troy. Lucy hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. They pulled out of the lot and turned north onto the old highway. Could be heading toward the interstate ramp. That highway branched off in multiple directions, but Carla forced a firm nod. Thank you. You may have helped save that child's life. Lucy gave them a sympathetic look before heading back inside. The faint smell of fried onions and stale coffee lingered in the night air as Carla and Troy returned to their car. Once they were back on the road, Carla connected via radio to the nearest trooper units, requesting coverage on the northbound highway. Despite the flurry of calls, neither she nor Troy spotted the dark sedan. Hours of searching turned up nothing more than fleeting glimpses on distant traffic cams, grainy images that might or might not have been Anthony's car. By 3 a.m., the tension gave way to exhaustion, though Carla refused to give up. They returned to the station, hoping new information might have trickled in. A young officer at the front desk said, "We got a tip from a motel clerk about a man and a boy matching the description. The motel is called the Pine View Lodge, 20 miles from here, near an old logging trail. They paid in cash and asked for a room in the back where no one would see them." Carla's adrenaline flared anew. She thanked the officer, then turned to Troy. "We go now?" He nodded, giving a quick word to dispatch. "We'll check it out. Have a backup unit follow us." Still wearing the same clothes from the previous day, Carla found herself behind the wheel again, her mind hammered by possibilities, some too dark to dwell on. She pictured the moment she first saw Ethan. Could she have read the signs better? Done something to stall the car? The guilt gnawed at her, fueling her determination. As they sped down the nearly deserted highway, dawn's first light hinted at the horizon, a pale strip of purple that signaled a new day. For Ethan, each passing minute was critical. Carla briefly closed her eyes at a red light, then reopened them, forging a silent promise. "I'm coming for you, kid. Hang in there." The motel in question was a single-story row of doors facing a weedy parking lot. A flickering neon sign proclaiming vacant seats buzzed overhead. Troy maneuvered the car into a far corner, away from direct line of sight. Carla grabbed her flashlight and got out, scanning the vehicles. There was a dark sedan parked near the last room. Her pulse soared. Together they approached the front office, stepping through a cloud of stale cigarette smoke. The night shift clerk inside was a bearded man in a threadbare sweater. He blinked blearily as they showed their badges. "Yes, that's the man," he said, pointing out the window at the sedan. He said it was just for one night, paid cash. The boy was carrying a baseball cap, looked scared. They went to room 7. Carla and Troy exchanged glances. "Did they leave at any point?" Carla asked quietly. The clerk shook his head. "Not that I saw." Thanking him, they moved back outside. Carla crouched behind a battered vending machine, peering toward room 7. A faint glow outlined the curtains. Troy signaled for their backup unit to stay out of sight. They had to confirm Ethan was inside before risking a forced entry. The last thing they wanted was a hostage situation going wrong. Carla advanced slowly, her footsteps muffled on the worn asphalt. Troy flanked her, weapon drawn but lowered. At the threshold, Carla listened for movement. A voice inside, Anthony's, presumably, sounded agitated. She heard the distinct note of fear in a child's quieter whimper. Carla exhaled, nerves taut. She glanced at Troy, who nodded. It was time to act. She rapped on the door, voice firm. "Police. Open up." There was a brief, charged silence. Carla's heart pounded. Then came hurried movement inside, a scrape of a chair. Anthony's voice called out, "What do you want?" Troy spoke loudly. "Anthony Brown, we know you have Ethan Morales in there. Release him and come out with your hands up." More silence. Carla pictured Anthony weighing his options. If he was truly part of a trafficking ring, he might have no intention of surrendering. She tightened her grip on her flashlight, ready to breach. Suddenly, the door jerked open. Anthony's figure stood in the doorway, hair disheveled, sweat glistening on his forehead. He glared at Carla and Troy, rage flickering in his eyes. "You have the wrong idea," he snapped. "Leave us alone." Carla's gaze flicked past him into the darkened room. She glimpsed Ethan perched on the edge of a bed, clutching his cap. The boy's eyes were wide, brimming with tears. His voice was lost behind the quiet panic of the moment. Troy took a step forward, phone in one hand to show Anthony the official Amber Alert for Ethan. "We know exactly who you are. Kidnapping, endangerment. If you let Ethan go now, you might avoid an even worse situation." For an instant, Anthony's face contorted, as if he might comply. Then, with a sudden furious motion, he tried to slam the door. Carla lunged, bracing her shoulder against it. Wood splintered as she forced it open, sending Anthony staggering back. Ethan's eyes widened, tears streaking his face. He looked desperately at Carla. She saw a bruise on his arm. Anger flared hot in her chest. This child had been trapped in a nightmare. "Stay back," Anthony growled, swinging out an arm. Troy ducked, the blow glancing off his shoulder. Carla drew her weapon, not pointing it at him yet, but holding it at the ready. "Anthony Brown, you're under arrest," she said, voice shaking with controlled fury. "Put your hands in the air." Anthony's gaze darted to Ethan, then back to the open door, calculating escape routes. He rushed for the small window instead, perhaps hoping to break through. Troy tackled him from the side, both men crashing into the low dresser. They struggled in a tangle of limbs, knocking a lamp to the floor. Anthony was wild, elbows flailing, eyes livid with desperation. Carla kept her weapon steady, but she couldn't risk firing with Troy so close. She moved to the child, voice low and urgent. "Ethan, come on, get behind me." The boy scrambled off the bed, pressing into Carla's side. She supported him with her free arm, guiding him toward the door. Behind them, Troy finally got a grip on Anthony's wrists, twisting his arm until the man yelped in pain. Carla holstered her weapon and snapped cuffs on Anthony's wrists with one decisive motion. He spewed a stream of curses, thrashing even as they pinned him face down on the stained carpet. Ethan clung to Carla's uniform, breathing in sharp, ragged sobs. She stroked his hair lightly, feeling a wave of relief tempered by lingering fear. "It's over," she whispered, though she barely believed it herself. "You're safe now." They hauled Anthony upright. He glared, spitting an accusation. "You have no proof." "He's my nephew." Carla ignored him. "We'll sort it out at the station," she said, voice cold. She led Ethan out of the motel room, stepping carefully over the shards of broken lamp and scattered clothes. Outside, dawn's early light cast a pallid glow over the parking lot. A second patrol car rolled in, red and blue lights cutting through the gray air. Ethan whimpered, tears drying in dirty streaks on his cheeks. Carla crouched to his level. "Ethan? My name's Carla. You're going to be okay." He hesitated, then nodded, trembling. She recognized a confusion of relief and terror swirling in him. She wanted nothing more than to wrap him in a warm blanket, to promise him normalcy again. She gently lifted the baseball cap from his clenched hands. The brim was badly bent, but it was obviously something he cherished. Carla placed it back in his grip, giving him a soft smile. That concluded the rescue. But Carla felt an unsettling truth press on her. Anthony Brown was likely just a small piece of a bigger puzzle, one that endangered children across multiple jurisdictions. If that was true, there would be more Ethan Moraleses out there who needed help. She helped Ethan into the back seat of a patrol car, letting him sit upright instead of lying down. Another officer, more maternal in demeanor, offered him a bottle of water and a small blanket. Carla could hardly describe the flood of emotions gripping her. Relief that Ethan was alive. Outrage at Anthony's monstrous actions. And a determined resolve to uncover who else was behind these abductions. Anthony was shoved into a separate cruiser, still ranting about how they had the wrong idea. Troy rubbed a bruise on his jaw, courtesy of Anthony's flailing elbow. He gave Carla a grim nod. "Let's get them both to the station." Carla watched the two patrol cars pull away, one containing Anthony Brown, the other with Ethan. She walked to her own car, ignoring the weariness in her bones, the stale taste of old coffee in her mouth. The night had turned into morning, but her work was far from finished. She leaned against the driver's side door, letting out a long breath. In the hush that followed the chaos, A wave of delayed shock washed over her. Adrenaline coursed through her limbs, and she felt tears prick her eyes. But she blinked them back. Ethan was safe. That was what mattered. A short while later, she and Troy followed the caravans back to the station. Parking outside, Carla noticed the sun peeking over the horizon, casting golden light across the precinct's worn bricks. An odd moment of beauty after a night's horrors. She tightened her jaw, swallowed, and pushed inside. They escorted Ethan to a quiet room away from the bustle, letting a department social worker speak with him gently, offering reassurance. Carla hovered by the window, arms folded, glimpsing the fear that lingered in Ethan's eyes. He needed time, safety, perhaps therapy to understand that not all grown-ups were out to harm him. Across the hall, Anthony Brown was booked. Carla saw him sitting in an interrogation room, cuffed to a metal table, scowling as an officer removed his shoes and personal effects. She felt a stab of pure rage looking at him. But she forced her emotions down. Professional composure had to reign now. As soon as Carla finished filing preliminary paperwork, she joined Troy in a separate observation booth adjacent to the interrogation room. They stood behind a one-way glass, watching as another detective began questioning Anthony. The usual routine: name, age, address, next of kin. Anthony was stony-faced, repeating the same lines about how Ethan was his nephew, how they had a misunderstanding, and so forth. The detective flashed pictures from the official missing child bulletin. Anthony's jaw tightened, but he still spouted denials. Carla glanced at Troy, who in turn rubbed the back of his neck, frustration etched on his features. Carla's phone pinged with a text from the Portwood PD, confirming the boy is indeed Ethan Morales. DNA and photo ID will be arranged ASAP. Parents en route. She read it aloud for Troy's benefit, feeling a wave of relief. Official confirmation meant no more flimsy excuses about nephew status. Ethan would soon be reunited with his real family. Yet Carla couldn't forget the references she had found to Anthony's ties with possibly bigger players, others who might be holding more children. She noticed the tension in Troy's expression, which likely mirrored her own thoughts. They both knew the case wouldn't end with Anthony's arrest. When the detective in the interrogation room asked about the other times Anthony's name appeared in missing child cases, Anthony tried a dismissive grin. Coincidence, he scoffed. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Carla clenched her fists. Troy placed a hand on her shoulder, a subtle reminder to keep calm. They needed a careful approach, or Anthony might lawyer up and go silent. She gave a small nod, swallowing her anger. After half an hour, Anthony demanded an attorney, shutting down the initial interrogation. Carla stepped away from the glass, heart pounding in frustration. We'll need more evidence to link him to the ring, if one exists. We can't let him slip away on a technicality. Troy tapped the side of his phone thoughtfully. We'll get it. For now, kidnapping charges alone will hold him. Meanwhile, let's comb through his personal belongings, phone records, anything else we can find in that motel room. He might have left a trail. He motioned for Carla to follow him down the hall to where evidence from Anthony's motel room was being catalogued. A couple of uniformed officers were laying out items: a phone with a cracked screen, a burner SIM card, some forged documents that tried to pass Ethan off as a relative. Carla's eyes narrowed at the sloppy attempts at forging. She recognized how criminals in certain rings rarely worked alone. Forging documents often implied a broader network. Before Carla could examine them in detail, a uniformed officer approached. Ethan's parents just arrived, he said quietly. They're in the waiting room. Carla's pulse skipped. She had pictured this moment. She left Troy to handle the search for clues, heading instead to the waiting room. Anticipation warred with dread inside her. Would Ethan's parents blame her for not stopping Anthony earlier? She opened the door to find a couple in disheveled clothing, Carmen Morales and Daniel Morales, both with red-rimmed eyes that spoke of nights spent without sleep. When Carmen spotted Carla, she rushed forward, trembling. Officer Jackson? I'm his mother. Please, where is my son? Carla spoke gently, voice as soothing as possible. He's safe and being looked after by our social worker. We'll reunite you in a moment. Daniel stepped in, tension radiating from him. My boy went missing 3 days ago. We thought. He swallowed hard, unable to finish the thought. Carla's heart ached. She could only imagine their torment. We believe he's unharmed. We took him from the suspect early this morning. He was frightened but physically okay, from what I could tell. Carmen broke down in tears of relief, staggering slightly as her husband caught her. Carla waited, letting them have a moment. She thought of Ethan's trembling hand gripping his baseball cap, how close he might have come to a worse fate. She felt an anger swirl in her gut that no child should endure such terror. Finally, Carmen wiped her eyes, voice quivering. "Can we see him?" Carla nodded. "Of course." She led them through the corridors to a quieter office space where Ethan was seated on a chair, sipping from a paper cup of juice. His eyes flickered up. At first, they were full of nervous confusion. Then, recognition dawned and he dropped his cup. He launched from his seat, stumbling toward his parents with a cry so heart-wrenching that Carla almost had to look away. Carmen sank to her knees, arms wide, and Ethan collapsed into her embrace, Daniel wrapping them both in a trembling hug. The family sobbed as one, undone by relief and lingering terror. Carla stood near the door, her throat tight. She remembered all her own regrets from the night, how she'd hesitated to do more. But in this moment, seeing them together, it felt like a reaffirmation of why she wore the badge. She quietly exited the room, giving them privacy. Leaning against the hallway wall, she exhaled, tears prickling at her eyes. Troy found her, holding out a box of tissues. She took one with a thin, grateful smile. "You did it," Troy said, his voice gentle. "He's safe." Carla nodded slowly, voice hushed. "Yes, but there are more kids out there who might not have been so lucky." He couldn't argue with that. "One step at a time," he murmured. Carla dabbed her eyes, steeling herself. "Let's finish combing through Anthony's stuff. Then we'll interview Ethan later, carefully, to see if he heard anything about others." She and Troy headed back to the evidence room, mentally preparing for the next phase, building a case that could dismantle whatever was behind Anthony Brown's kidnapping attempt. Carla carried the image of Ethan's reunion with his parents in her heart, fueling the determination she would need for what lay ahead. Carla Jackson waited until Ethan's reunion with his parents was complete, then quietly slipped out into the corridor. She caught a glimpse of Daniel Morales, arms still wrapped protectively around his son, while Carmen stroked Ethan's hair, whispering reassurances. The sight gave Carla a renewed sense of purpose. Though one child was saved, her instincts told her Anthony Brown had ties to something bigger. Down the hall, Detective Troy McDonald emerged from the evidence room. He motioned Carla over, a grim expression pinching his features. "We've pulled data from that phone we found in the motel room," he said in a low voice. "Most of it's text messages, encrypted apps. But the fragments our tech people decrypted mention times, meet-up spots, possible transaction codes for children." Carla felt a chill move up her spine. So it's not just him acting alone. This looks like part of an organized ring. "That's what it suggests," Troy confirmed. "He's not talking yet, but the phone's something. Could open doors if we decode more messages." Carla glanced down at the stack of printed screenshots he handed over. Each was a snippet of text in which Anthony seemed to coordinate with unknown parties, using terms like delivery, receiver, and coded references to bundles, all suspiciously consistent with trafficking. She recognized the sense of dread building, along with the unshakable determination to shut this operation down. She gestured at the interrogation room. "Has he asked for his lawyer yet?" Troy nodded. "He demanded representation about half an hour ago. The public defender's on the way, but we'll see if that changes his tune. Sometimes, faced with major charges, suspects flip to get a deal." Carla set her jaw. "We'll see." She paused, lowering her voice further. "I want to talk to Ethan. Carefully. Maybe he overheard something in that car or the motel that can guide us." Troy's brow furrowed. "He's been through a lot. I don't want to push him too hard." "I know," Carla murmured. "But if more kids are out there, we need every clue. A gentle approach is best. We'll have the psychologist in the room." Troy didn't argue. He trusted Carla's instincts with children, partly because of her calm, empathetic manner. She recalled how she herself once froze during a crisis as a rookie and how a compassionate mentor helped her open up. She wanted to give Ethan that same sense of safety and understanding. Stepping into a quieter office, Carla found the department's child psychologist, Dr. Harriet Lewis, a warm-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in helping young victims of trauma. Ethan sat on a cushioned seat opposite her, clutching his baseball cap with both hands. Carla noticed the subtle trembling in his shoulders, and her heart twisted. "Hi, Ethan," Carla said softly, crossing the room and kneeling beside him to be at eye level. "I'm Officer Jackson, but you can just call me Carla if you want. How are you feeling?" Ethan hesitated. Glancing at Dr. Lewis for reassurance, he then turned back to Carla. "Tired," he whispered. I couldn't sleep last night." Carla nodded. "That makes sense. I'm sorry you went through something so scary. But you're safe now. Your parents are here, and they'll be with you soon. Dr. Lewis is here to make sure you're okay?" He nodded, lips pursed. "Thanks," he said, voice faint. Carla and Dr. Lewis exchanged a quick look. The psychologist gave a nod indicating it was okay for Carla to gently probe for details. Carla drew a small breath, keeping her tone calm and gentle. "Ethan, can I ask you a couple of questions about Anthony Brown? The man we found you with?" Ethan's grip tightened on his cap. He swallowed, eyes darting to the door as if fearful Anthony might appear. "He told me not to talk," he finally managed. "He got really mad if I said stuff." A pang of anger flashed in Carla's chest. "He can't hurt you now," she said gently. "He's in jail. We're trying to figure out if he did this to other kids, too. Did he mention any other people?" Dr. Lewis placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. "If you need a break, just say so. We only want to help." Ethan nodded, blinking back tears. He was talking on the phone a lot. Sometimes he used speakerphone, but not always. He called people by numbers, like number 3 or number 5, and they used weird words. He said things like, "The product's still good." A stone seemed to settle in Carla's stomach. Product? In the context of a trafficker's coded lingo, it almost certainly referred to children. She tamped down her revulsion, focusing on what else Ethan might know. "Did he say anything about where he was supposed to take you?" Carla asked softly. Ethan's lips trembled. "He kept mentioning a lake house or something. I was scared. I don't know which lake though. Just that he said to the person on the phone, 'I'll be at the house near the lake by Thursday.'" Carla and Dr. Lewis exchanged glances. Troy had told her about a property search earlier that turned up a few addresses under Anthony's name, but nothing explicitly mentioning a lake. Possibly it was owned by one of his associates. "That's really helpful, Ethan," Carla said. "You did great telling us that." He sniffled, nodding. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Carla promised, her tone tender. "None of this is your fault. You're safe and we'll make sure no one else can hurt you." Ethan closed his eyes, holding the cap to his chest as though it were a protective shield. Dr. Lewis reached over and gently patted his arm. Carla smiled at him, relief and sorrow mingling in her heart. Each new detail about Anthony Brown's network solidified the suspicion that bigger forces were at play. Carla rose, stepping outside to find Troy waiting with a phone in hand. His expression was serious, but there was a spark of hope. "Ran a quick search for properties near lakes in a 100-mile radius connected to Brown or any known aliases. Found 2 that might fit. One is a small fishing cabin on Lake Vesper. The other is an old summer home on Greenwood Lake." Carla recalled Ethan's words. He said he'd be at the house near the lake by Thursday. She glanced at the date on her watch. It was already Wednesday morning. He could have been planning to move Ethan there tomorrow. The question is, do we believe it's Lake Vesper or Greenwood Lake? Troy exhaled slowly. Both are remote areas. The cabin on Lake Vesper belongs to a Joseph Brown, could be a relative of Anthony's. We have no record of Greenwood Lake property owners linking to Brown, though it might be under a front name. We should probably check both. Carla's phone buzzed with an incoming call from the station's IT specialist, Patel. She answered. "Officer Jackson." Patel's voice came crackling through. "Jackson, good timing. We've recovered a partial text conversation from Anthony Brown's phone that references Vesper. It says, confirming drop at Vesper. Thursday night, 11 p.m. Don't be late. There's more, but that's the gist. Carla's heart pounded. Thanks, Patel, she said, hanging up and turning to Troy. That's it. Lake Vesper. The property we found under Joseph Brown's name has to be the place. Troy nodded. We should coordinate with the local sheriff's department out that way. If there's a chance more children are being held, we need a full team. Carla rubbed the back of her neck, suddenly feeling the weight of the night's events. Yet the adrenaline pushed her forward, fueling her sense of duty. She sent an urgent text to her commanding officer, summarizing the intel: Lake Vesper, potential trafficking hideout, planning a law enforcement operation. They agreed to move fast. The possibility that more kids could be brought to that remote cabin by Thursday was too pressing to delay. Carla felt a swirl of emotions: anger, fear, grim resolve. She pictured Ethan's tearful eyes and the bruise on his arm. Now, it was about preventing that horror from happening to anyone else. By mid-morning, Carla and Troy had joined a briefing with other officers, including a grizzled county sheriff named Lee Harrington, whose jurisdiction included Lake Vesper. He studied the case files with narrowed eyes. Never heard of this Joseph Brown, he muttered, flipping through pages. But we've had strange rumors around that lake for a while. People hearing late-night boat motors, suspicious comings and goings. Carla tapped a satellite image pinned to a corkboard. It showed dense woodland around the lake, with only a few cabins scattered along the shore. If we can isolate which cabin is Brown's, we'll plan a covert approach. No telling how many accomplices might be there. Sheriff Harrington sighed. We have limited manpower for a large-scale operation, but I can spare a few of my best deputies. We'll coordinate with your team. Carla thanked him. We don't want to spook them. If they realize we're onto them, they might scatter, or worse, harm any children on site. A hush settled over the group as they discussed the strategy. They'd approach Lake Vesper late that night, scout the property, and plan to strike if they confirmed captives or saw suspicious activity. It felt like the calm before a storm. Once the briefing ended, Carla pulled Troy aside. We need to see if Anthony might reveal more, especially if he knows we discovered Vesper. Any chance we can grill him again before his lawyer fully shuts it down? Troy frowned thoughtfully. Could try. Might be a long shot. They returned to the interrogation room area. Anthony had been assigned a public defender, a harried woman with dark hair tied back in a messy bun. She stood in the hallway, flipping through a copy of the charges, while Anthony sulked in the corner, cuffed to a chair. Officer Jackson, Detective McDonald, the lawyer greeted, not unkindly, but firmly. My client has invoked his right to remain silent regarding the kidnapping. He asserts this is a misunderstanding. Carla bit down on a retort, choosing her words carefully. We have reason to believe your client may know the whereabouts of other children in danger, especially if he has associates around Lake Vesper. We're hoping he'll do the right thing. The lawyer's gaze flicked to Anthony. My client denies these accusations. If there are other children involved, he has no knowledge of it. Anthony's lips twitched into a bitter sneer. You can't prove anything. Carla leaned forward, ignoring the surge of anger. We already know about Joseph Brown's cabin. We know you planned a meeting there. If you're innocent, help us figure out who else is involved. Save yourself a heavier charge. Anthony's eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, or reluctant acknowledgement. Carla could almost see the gears turning in his head. But after a tense pause, he clamped his mouth shut, shook his head, and looked away. The lawyer set her jaw. That's all. Unless you have new evidence you haven't presented, we'll be leaving for arraignment soon. Troy exhaled, giving Carla a slight headshake. They had to let the process play out. As they walked away, Carla muttered, He's terrified of whoever's running this ring. He might only talk if he thinks there's a deal in it for him. Let's hope we don't need him, Troy replied grimly. We'll go to the cabin ourselves. Shortly before noon, Carla stepped outside the station for a moment, inhaling fresh air. She realized she hadn't eaten anything since the night before and her stomach twisted with hunger. She took a few sips of water from a nearby cooler, the dryness in her throat easing. The day felt uncommonly bright, the sky an almost harsh blue, as if mocking the dark events unfolding beneath its gaze. She wandered to the parking lot, where she saw Carmen and Daniel Morales speaking softly with a social worker while Ethan dozed in the back seat of their car. Carla approached, feeling a tug of compassion for the traumatized family. Daniel spotted her and stepped forward, gratitude and exhaustion evident in his face. "I want to thank you again, officer. You saved our son's life." Carla shook her head gently. "Just doing my job. I'm sorry it happened in the first place. How's Ethan holding up?" Carmen joined them, arms folded protectively. "He's still shaken. He barely spoke on the drive, just told us he was so scared when that man took him." Her eyes filled with tears. "But at least he's with us now. Alive. That's all that matters." Carla nodded. "I'm relieved he's safe. Please give him time. Therapy can help. We can recommend resources through the department." Carmen's gaze shifted, worry etched in her brow. "Will you catch the rest of them? I overheard a bit. Other kids might be in danger?" Carla's heart twisted. "We're doing everything possible, Ms. Morales. We have leads on a location, but I can't discuss details. Just know we're pushing hard to stop this for good." Daniel rested a hand on his wife's shoulder. "We won't keep you. We just wanted to say thank you. If there's anything we can do, testify, anything, just let us know." Carla managed a small smile. "Of course. Take care of Ethan. That's the best thing you can do." They left soon after, heading home, presumably to let Ethan sleep in his own bed and begin the long road to recovery. Carla watched their car pull out of the lot, reflection swirling in her thoughts. She couldn't ignore the possibility that, without her gut instinct during that routine stop, Ethan might still be missing. She also recognized how easily she might have missed the signs. It was a sobering realization. Turning back inside, Carla found Troy finalizing preparations for the operation at Lake Vesper. The plan was to head out that afternoon, set up a perimeter with the county sheriff's team, and lie in wait until dark. If the ring was meeting there at 11 p.m. the next night, they might see early arrivals or suspect movements. The idea was to gather enough evidence for a decisive raid. By the time 2 p.m. rolled around, Carla had fueled up her cruiser, run a final check on her gear, and found herself caravanning north alongside Troy's unmarked sedan and a few county patrol vehicles. The roads led out of Willow Bend's suburban sprawl, winding past farmland and slowly transitioning to dense woodland that stretched toward the horizon. The sunlight slanted through the canopy of tall pines, giving an almost idyllic view, an unsettling contrast to the grim reason for their presence. Sheriff Harrington guided them over narrow backroads until they reached a gravel turnoff bearing a rusty sign that read, "Lake Vesper, 2 miles." They parked in a small clearing out of sight. No houses or cabins were visible yet, just trees and the faint glimmer of water through the branches. Carla studied a topographical map. Joseph Brown's cabin was on the northwestern bank, a quarter-mile from the nearest neighbor. They set up a makeshift command post behind a stand of thick pines. Officers donned bulletproof vests, tested radio frequencies, and placed binoculars and night vision gear in readiness. Dusk was still hours away, but the sense of tension and anticipation weighed on everyone. Carla felt her pulse quicken, remembering the high-stakes rescue of Ethan and hoping they could replicate that success on a larger scale. Around 6 p.m., Troy motioned for Carla to join him and 2 deputies, a tall man named Perkins and a younger woman named Rios, for a quiet recon. They would circle closer to the cabin, see if it appeared occupied, and note any vehicles. Moving carefully along the tree line, they advanced in single file, stepping over roots and dead leaves to minimize noise. The woods were thick here, the ground soft with moss and pine needles. Carla's senses were on high alert, attuned to every crack of a twig underfoot or rustle of branches overhead. As they neared a clearing, she spotted a weathered cabin, faintly illuminated by a single porch light. A battered SUV was parked out front. Carla peered through binoculars, heart thudding. The license plate wasn't visible, but the vehicle's shape didn't match Anthony Brown's sedan. Could it be an accomplice? They crouched behind a fallen log for a better vantage. No movement was visible through the cabin's windows, though the slats of the blinds were partly drawn. Carla whispered to Troy, "We wait until nightfall, see if anyone arrives or leaves?" He nodded, motioning Perkins and Rios to flank the area from either side. keeping enough distance to remain unseen. They retreated into the forest, returning to the command post to discuss strategy with the rest of the team. The hours stretched on, tension building as darkness gradually settled over Lake Vesper. Around 9 p.m., a deputy radioed that he spotted a small truck approaching the cabin, lights off, barely visible except for the crunch of gravel under its tires. Carla, Troy, and Sheriff Harrington listened intently, adrenaline spiking. The deputy reported seeing two individuals exit the truck, both wearing hooded jackets, carrying what looked like luggage or large duffel bags. They disappeared inside the cabin. Carla exchanged a look with Troy. "This could be it," she breathed. "They're bringing in something, maybe supplies, or worse, more trafficked kids." Harrington's face was grim in the glow of a lantern. "We've got to be sure before we move. If they do have children in there, we want to avoid a violent confrontation that puts them in harm's way." Carla nodded. "We'll keep watching until we have enough visual confirmation. But we can't let them slip out either." From their vantage in the woods, the team maintained radio contact, updating each other on minimal movements around the cabin. Lights flickered inside, shadows passing in front of the windows. Carla's pulse hammered, knowing that at any moment, a child could appear, or the suspects might attempt to flee. The forest was eerily silent except for insects chirping and the faint lapping of water against the shore. Time crawled. They heard muffled voices from inside, but not clearly enough to identify how many. Occasionally, a silhouette crossed a window, pausing as if listening for something outside. Carla kept her breathing steady, her hands tight around her flashlight and sidearm. The biggest danger would be a frantic suspect who realized law enforcement was closing in. Shortly before 10 p.m., Rios radioed in, voice taut with tension, "I see movement at the side of the cabin. 2, no, 3 individuals stepping out to smoke, it looks like. Hard to tell, but they're definitely armed. One's carrying a rifle on his shoulder." Carla's skin prickled. Armed suspects meant they had to be doubly cautious. Troy, crouched beside Carla, said quietly, "We'll need the SWAT-like approach from Harrington's team. This is beyond a simple knock." Carla nodded, biting her lip. "We wait for them to go back inside. Then we can get closer. If they have guns, we can't risk them fleeing into the woods or harming anyone inside." Minutes felt like hours as the suspects finished their smoke break and retreated indoors. Rios signaled they'd re-entered through a side door. The moment the side door slammed shut, Carla flicked her radio. "All teams be ready. We move in quietly." "Sheriff, your call?" Harrington's hushed voice came over the comgo. "Everyone converge on the cabin, surround it. Make sure vehicles are blocked. On my count we move in. Keep your eyes peeled for any sign of children." Carla's stomach churned with both dread and urgency. She, Troy, and 2 deputies advanced through the undergrowth, hearts hammering. The lights inside the cabin took on a sinister glow against the darkness. Shadows danced across the windows, possibly more people than they'd initially counted. They reached the battered SUV parked beside the cabin, flattening themselves against its side. Carla inched forward, peering through a grimy side window. The interior was empty of passengers, though a coil of rope and a few plastic containers lay on the back seat. A wave of revulsion rolled through her. Were these used to restrain victims? Harrington whispered through the comm, "Teams in position?" One by one, the deputy pairs confirmed. Carla readied herself, adjusting her grip on her weapon. A hush settled as Harrington began the final countdown. In a flurry of motion, the perimeter teams surged forward, surrounding the cabin's front, back, and sides. Carla and Troy rushed to the porch, with Harrington beside them. Another deputy hammered on the door, shouting, "Sheriff's Department. Open up." Inside, they heard scuffling and raised voices. Someone cursed. The door didn't budge. Harrington nodded for the battering ram. A burly deputy swung it, splintering the door frame on the second hit. The door flew open, revealing a cramped living room with 2 men scrambling for cover. "Hands up!" Carla shouted, stepping inside with her weapon raised. The reek of stale smoke and cheap liquor assaulted her nose. The men turned, eyes wild with surprise. One wore a hooded jacket, the other was in a stained t-shirt, both brandishing handguns. Shots rang out. Carla dove behind a wooden cabinet, adrenaline spiking. Splinters sprayed as bullets tore into the paneling. Her ears rang from the close-quarters gunfire. She glimpsed Troy flattening himself behind an overturned chair. Harrington returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting the dingy space. In the chaos, Carla heard a scream from deeper in the house, a child's scream. Her heart lurched. She had no time for fear. She inched around the cabinet, found the man with the hood reloading, and fired a single shot into his shoulder. He howled, dropping his gun. The other suspect attempted to retreat down a hallway, exchanging gunfire with the deputies stationed at the rear door. "Move forward," Harrington called out. Deputies advanced, quickly disarming the wounded man. Carla stepped over fallen debris, her mind locked on the child's scream. She heard another voice, muffled, possibly more children in a back room. She followed the hallway, adrenaline pounding so hard it distorted the noise of shouting behind her. A third suspect appeared at the end of the hall, brandishing a rifle. He aimed at Carla, eyes burning with hostility. She instinctively dove to the side. The shot zinged past, punching a hole in the wall. Before the suspect could fire again, Troy emerged behind him, tackling him to the floor with a jarring thud. The rifle clattered away. Carla scrambled up, assisting Troy in restraining the thrashing man until the suspect was subdued and cuffed. The hallway stood littered with battered furniture and half-torn posters. At the far end, a door was padlocked from the outside. Carla's breath caught. She fumbled with her utility belt, yanking out a small bolt cutter. She snapped the padlock off, heart hammering. Swinging the door open, she flicked on her flashlight. For children, 3 girls and 1 boy, huddled in a corner, eyes wide with terror. Carla's voice cracked with emotion. "It's okay, police. You're safe now." She saw tears coursing down their cheeks, saw the desperate hope in their gazes. They looked exhausted, dirty, hands trembling. One child, a girl around 9, clutched a threadbare teddy bear much as Ethan had clutched his baseball cap. Deputies rushed in behind Carla, helping coax the children out of the makeshift holding room. The girls whimpered, clinging to each other, and the lone boy stared at Carla with raw fear in his eyes. She forced a reassuring smile. "We're not going to hurt you. I promise." Outside, the crackle of radio chatter indicated the cabin was now secure. The suspects had been apprehended, and no further threats remained. Carla guided the children down the hall, past the living room where paramedics were already tending to the wounded suspect. Broken furniture, bullet holes, and the acrid smell of gunpowder served as a brutal reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. Deputies escorted the children to waiting ambulances, where medics offered blankets and water. Carla's throat tightened at the sight of them blinking under harsh flashlights, their eyes adjusting to the night after who knows how long in that padlocked room. Troy came alongside her, face drawn. "We got them," he murmured. "For kids. Possibly more out there in other locations, but for tonight, these 4 are safe." Carla's shoulders sagged with relief, tears gathering. "We did what we had to do. If we'd waited until tomorrow night, they could have been transported somewhere else." Harrington passed by, nodding grimly. "Good work, you two. Let's keep it professional. We have a crime scene to process. Don't let emotions cloud your focus." Carla managed a curt nod, though inside she felt raw. "Understood, Sheriff." Before she could say more, one of the girls, short-haired, maybe 10 or 11, walked up, blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. She gazed up at Carla with a trembling smile. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Then she hurried back to the ambulance. Carla closed her eyes for a moment. These children were in for a long road of healing, but at least they were alive. No child should have to experience such terror. She steadied herself, turning her attention to the living room where forensics teams were beginning to catalog evidence. The battered SUV and the small truck in front of the cabin would be towed and searched. Cell phones, documents, laptops, anything that might tie these men to a larger ring. Carla inhaled, drawing on her last reserves of energy to help gather statements, bag evidence, and photograph the scene. Sunrise was still hours away, but she could already feel the physical toll of the operation. Troy spent a portion of the night assisting Harrington's deputies in the official questioning of the suspects, each of whom gave variations of denial and half-lies. One suspect claimed he had just arrived for a fishing trip, while another insisted he'd found the kids here. None admitted to orchestrating anything. But with children locked in a padlocked room, they were clearly in deep trouble. Carla spoke quietly with the children in the presence of a social worker from the county. Most were too overwhelmed to give coherent statements, but one of the older girls mentioned hearing phone calls about appointments and buyers. Carla's stomach twisted at the hateful language. She jotted notes, determined to piece together enough evidence to reach the ring's core members. By the time the frantic activity died down, it was nearly 4 a.m. The children had been taken to a nearby hospital for checkups. The suspects were loaded into separate patrol cars, under heavy guard. The cabin's living room was cordoned off with crime scene tape, the floor smeared with blood from the firefight. Carla stood in the yard, gazing at the reflection of moonlight on Lake Vesper's still surface. The scene might have been peaceful if not for the horrors lurking inside. Troy approached, face etched with exhaustion. "We'll organize a full briefing in the morning. For now, we have the suspects, the evidence, and hopefully enough to link them to Anthony Brown. This has to connect back to him. He was the one referencing Vesper." Carla nodded, hugging her arms around her chest against the night chill. "We need to confirm if Joseph Brown is among these men or if there's someone else behind the scenes. Either way, we have a chunk of the operation." She thought of Ethan, safe at home with his family. That piece of the puzzle had led them here, rescuing 4 more kids. Despite the exhaustion, Carla felt a surge of hope. Together, they were cracking something that thrived on secrecy. They returned to Willow Bend close to sunrise. Carla collapsed in one of the station's break room chairs, sipping stale coffee that tasted bitter on her tongue. Troy slumped opposite her, stifling a yawn. "I'll get these statements typed up, then we can crash for a few hours before the next wave of paperwork." Carla rubbed her eyes, fighting back weariness. "Yeah, I'll just finish the initial incident report, then I'm out." But as she pulled up the blank report form on her computer, she felt the swirl of 100 details. She typed quickly, recounting the raid in staccato sentences. Eventually, she forced herself to leave the station. She drove back to her small apartment, mind buzzing with everything that had happened. Images of the children's terrified faces and the suspects' menacing guns replayed in her head like a loop. She wondered if she'd be able to sleep at all. She managed a few hours of restless dozing, jerked awake by nightmares of locked doors and silent pleas. The moment she opened her eyes, the reality that 4 more children were saved gave her a tenuous sense of relief. Still not enough, she thought, recalling the phone messages that implied more transactions and more victims across state lines. Back at the station by mid-morning, Carla found Troy in conversation with an FBI liaison, a special agent named Stephanie Holt. They were reviewing the evidence from Lake Vesper. Holt had short blonde hair and a brisk demeanor that conveyed efficiency. She spoke with clipped authority. "You have reason to believe Anthony Brown is part of a multi-state child trafficking network. We've had intel on a group operating around this region, using cabins and motels for short-term holding. Your bust at Lake Vesper gave us a big lead. My team can help with digital forensics and multi-agency coordination." Carla greeted Holt with a firm handshake. "Thank you for stepping in. We suspect these men have connections beyond state lines, and Brown might be the local link." Holt nodded. "We'll run face recognition on the suspects from the cabin. If they match any known affiliates, we can build a network map. In the meantime, has Anthony Brown been made aware that his accomplices have been caught?" Troy's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "He's still behind bars here, awaiting arraignment. We haven't told him yet. Might be leverage." Agent Holt tapped her chin. "Let's see if he wants to make a deal. If he's looking at a life sentence for kidnapping and trafficking, maybe he'll flip and name names." Carla folded her arms. He was pretty tight-lipped, but maybe the new developments will scare him, especially if he sees the feds involved. That afternoon, Carla, Troy, and Agent Holt headed to the holding area where Anthony Brown waited. His public defender was present again, appearing more flustered this time after hearing about the Lake Vesper raid. The seriousness of the charges loomed much larger now. Anthony Brown looked pale, cheeks sallow, hair unkempt. He glanced up with a sneer. But Carla noticed fear flickering in his eyes when Agent Holt introduced herself as FBI. "You again," he spat at Carla. "You just can't leave me alone." Carla kept a professional composure, though she felt a twinge of anger. "We have new information, Mr. Brown. Several of your associates were apprehended at a cabin near Lake Vesper last night. 4 children were rescued. They're telling us everything." Anthony's expression flickered. He tried to hide it, but Carla saw the panic. He attempted a shrug. "I don't know them." Troy leaned forward, sliding a document across the table. "Arrest photos from the cabin suspects. These men had references to you on their phones. We'll prove you're connected. The question is, do you want to cooperate and get a lighter sentence, or go down with them?" Brown's lawyer opened her mouth to object, but Agent Holt spoke calmly. "If your client wants to refute the evidence, let him. But we can tie him to the ring. The children you abducted, the phone we seized, the texts about Vesper, it's all aligning." Anthony's eyes darted from one face to another. Carla sensed him weighing his options. Finally he huffed. "What kind of deal?" Carla suppressed a triumphant rush. Troy stepped in. "We can't promise specifics, that's the DA's call. But if you give us verifiable information to recover more children or arrest higher-ups, the DA might offer concessions." The lawyer pursed her lips, arms folded. "We want to see the written terms." Agent Holt tapped the table. "It depends on the accuracy of your client's intel. The FBI will confirm everything. If he's lying, no deal." "Understood." Anthony swallowed, looking cornered. For a moment, Carla thought he might lash out or revert to defiance. But the mention of new arrests, the FBI involvement, and the potential for a glimmer of leniency all seemed to converge. Slowly he let out a breath. "Fine. I'll talk, but I want it in writing that I won't get life." Carla, Troy, and Holt exchanged quick looks. They knew the DA might not guarantee that, but they could at least open negotiations. Holt stepped outside to make a phone call. Carla remained behind with Troy, watching Anthony closely. He wouldn't look Carla in the eyes. "This ring, I'm not a big shot," he muttered. "I just transport kids from point A to point B. Sometimes I don't even know where they end up." "It's bigger than you think." Carla felt her stomach knot. "We want names. Locations. Everything." Anthony scowled. "They call themselves the Redwood Collective, stupid name, but that's what I've heard. They've got a few collection points across the state lines. Cabins, old motels, trailer parks. I mostly deal with a woman named Naomi Fitz. She's mid-level, handles money and shipments. I pass the kids to her, she moves them on. I never saw her final buyers. The last time I heard from her, she was operating near a rest area on Route 18, using a fake shipping company to blend in. If she finds out I ratted, I'm as good as dead." Carla forced down a wave of disgust. Children referred to as shipments? She breathed slowly, keeping her composure. "We'll protect you if you give us enough to shut this down for good." Anthony let out a bitter laugh. "How do you plan to protect me from them? They have connections everywhere. Cops, judges, business owners. Money buys them a lot of cover." Troy's face hardened. "We'll do what it takes. But you have to give us something solid on Naomi Fitz and whoever she answers to." Anthony pressed his lips together. "Look, there's a big warehouse operation where they sometimes hold kids short-term before shipping them out of state. Heard it's somewhere near the southern border, a ranch property. Fitz organizes that part. I only visited once, to drop off a boy last year. Don't know the exact address. She calls it Providence Ranch or something. That's all I know." Carla scribbled notes, adrenaline sparking at the possibility of a major lead. If Fitz was a key broker, maybe they could find Providence Ranch. "Keep going," she urged. "We need everything." Anthony rattled off a few phone numbers he recalled, uncertain addresses, mentions of some men known only by monikers like Doc or Drake. The lawyer hovered, ready to cut him off if things got too risky, but it seemed Anthony was fully spooked, enough to spill quite a bit. By the time Agent Holt returned, carrying the DA's initial terms, Carla's mind reeled with potential leads. She knew many of them might be dead ends or half-truths, but it was more than they had before. Even if Anthony was only partially honest, his confessions could point them toward new raids, new rescues. Anthony scrawled a shaky signature on an agreement to cooperate, though no firm sentence guarantee was made. Carla and Troy left the room, stepping into the hallway with Agent Holt. They felt a sense of momentary victory overshadowed by the sobering knowledge of just how big this Redwood collective might be. Holt paused, exhaling. "We'll move quickly to verify what he gave us. My team can try tracing those phone numbers. That ranch property might be in a rural county to the south. We'll also coordinate with other field offices." Her eyes flicked between Carla and Troy. "You two might have just kicked open a wasp's nest." Carla let out a shaky breath. "We can handle it." "We have to." Troy rubbed the back of his neck, exhaustion still evident. "Let's get to work. Every hour we wait, more kids could be taken." And so it went. Their relatively small-town case had exploded into a multi-state manhunt against a shadowy collective that thrived on secrecy. Carla felt both daunted and grimly determined. That afternoon, Carla updated the station's commander, who authorized a temporary task force. Troy spent hours on the phone with the FBI, cross-referencing property records that might match the so-called Providence Ranch. Carla scanned through missing children bulletins from the past 6 months, searching for patterns that might align with Anthony's timeline. They intended to pass all these findings along to Agent Holt, whose federal resources could dig even deeper. Amid the frenzy, Carla found a moment to call Ethan Morales' parents, just to check on him. Carmen answered, voice softer than before. "He's doing okay, considering. Sleeping a lot. Seems to feel safer at home." Carla smiled at that. "I'm glad to hear it. Things are moving on our side. I can't give specifics, but we're going after the people behind this." "Thank you," Carmen said quietly. "Knowing you're working on it, it means everything." When the call ended, Carla set her phone down, letting a hint of pride wash over her. As draining as the job was, these moments reminded her of why she started policing in the first place. She closed her eyes briefly, focusing on the memory of Ethan's shaky smile when she first told him he was safe. Troy interrupted her reverie. "Got a lead from the feds. One of the phone numbers Brown recalled is registered to a warehouse shipping outfit in Riverside County, Suncorp Transport. Could be a front. Agent Holt wants to meet us there tomorrow to surveil the place." Carla nodded, forcing her weary body to keep going. "Let's do it. Redwood Collective, Naomi Fitz, some kind of warehouse or ranch property, it all connects. If we can tie it together, we might find a real shot at dismantling this operation." He gave her a supportive grin. "Grab coffee, partner. We're just getting started." Carla Jackson found it difficult to sleep the night before the planned operation against the Redwood Collective. Her cramped apartment felt stifling with anticipation. Photographs of rescued children and reams of notes about Naomi Fitz and the rumored Providence Ranch cluttered her small kitchen table. She sipped cold water to calm her nerves, but nothing dispelled the knot of tension in her stomach. This was it, a chance to end a trafficking ring that had haunted her thoughts ever since she discovered Ethan Morales trapped in Anthony Brown's car. By dawn, Carla was at the station, going over details with Detective Troy McDonald and FBI agent Stephanie Holt. Their plan hinged on the intel provided by Anthony Brown. An industrial shipping warehouse under the front name Suncorp Transport was being used for sorting or temporary holding of trafficked children before they were sent off to places like the ranch. They'd been surveilling Suncorp Transport for 2 days, watching different trucks come and go at odd hours. Now, they had enough evidence to get warrants for a search and possible arrests. Carla leafed through the warrant documents one last time, mind flicking back to each step that had led them here. The rescue of Ethan, the bust at Lake Vesper, the terrified children found in that padlocked room, and Anthony Brown's grudging confession. It felt surreal that so much had happened in such a short span. But if they played this right, the Redwood Collective might finally be broken apart. Troy caught her eye. "You ready? I just got word from Holt that the local SWAT team is en route. We hit the warehouse at precisely 10 a.m. Carla nodded, adjusting the bulletproof vest strapped around her torso. Her reflection in a window showed circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady. "Let's do this." Together with half a dozen FBI agents and the local SWAT contingent, They caravanned to the outskirts of a neighboring town, where the Suncorp transport facility squatted behind tall chain-link fences. A large sign advertised logistics services, promising fast, reliable shipping. Carla felt a wave of anger at the thought of unsuspecting neighbors or businesses that might have no idea what truly went on inside. When they arrived, the SWAT vehicles blocked off both ends of the service road leading to the warehouse. Holt gave a terse order over the radio, and uniformed officers poured out. Carla and Troy approached the main gate, weapons at the ready, hearts pounding with adrenaline. She saw movement behind the tinted windows of the building's main office. At the security booth, a startled guard froze, then reached for a phone. 2 SWAT officers seized him, forcing him to drop the receiver. "Warrant!" Agent Holt barked, flashing the official document against the fence. A second guard panicked and tried to run into a side door, but the team had planned for every exit. He was promptly tackled and handcuffed. Carla's gaze darted around the wide asphalt lot, searching for trucks or smaller vehicles attempting to flee. She spotted a black SUV revving its engine near the loading bay. "Troy, the SUV!" she shouted. He nodded, sprinting toward it with 2 deputies. The SUV lurched forward but found its path blocked by an armored SWAT truck. Tires screeched, and the driver jumped out, raising both hands in surrender. Carla recognized him from Anthony Brown's phone photos, one of the Redwood Collective's couriers. Inside, the warehouse reeked of diesel, metal, and stale coffee. Overhead fluorescents buzzed, illuminating rows of shelves stacked with boxes labeled for shipping. At first glance, it looked like a normal logistics facility. Then Carla noticed the locked steel partition at the far side, manned by a pair of angry-looking men in casual work clothes. She rushed forward, flanked by Troy and 2 FBI agents. The men retreated, pulling out pistols. Shots rang out, echoing off the metal walls. Carla dove behind a tall crate, heart hammering. She returned fire, aiming carefully to avoid any chance of innocent hostages behind the partition. One man cursed, dropping his weapon as a bullet grazed his forearm. The other realized they were outnumbered and threw down his gun. Holt and Troy swooped in, cuffing them. Inside the partition, Carla yelled, keying up her radio. "That's where they might be holding victims." A SWAT member used heavy bolt cutters on the locked steel door. Carla's pulse raced, remembering the children found in the cabin. She prayed they weren't too late. The door finally gave way, revealing a cramped hallway and a makeshift set of rooms separated by chain-link dividers. Carla peered through the gaps. She spotted people, 3 children, maybe 10 to 12 years old, plus several adults who looked equally terrified and worn. Their wide eyes stared back at her. Some were teenagers, trembling in corners. Others looked scarcely older than Ethan. "Clear," Troy called out, stepping carefully into one of the rooms. The huddled group recoiled at first, but Carla shouted, "We're police. We're here to help." One teenage girl burst into sobs. A boy clung to the chain link, tearful relief overcoming him. Officers moved in, cutting zip ties, unlocking small cages that had been fashioned out of metal fencing. Carla swallowed the bile rising in her throat. The Redwood Collective treated human beings like cargo, caging them like animals. She guided 2 trembling kids toward the exit, pressing water bottles into their hands. "You're safe," she repeated, voice choking on emotion. "No one's going to hurt you now." Amid the rescue, Carla searched for Naomi Fitz, the name Anthony Brown had given them. Agents scoured the offices, flipping through file cabinets stuffed with shipping manifests, searching for any sign of the woman rumored to be coordinating these transports. So far, they detained half a dozen employees, but none matched the name Fitz. Carla suspected she might be somewhere else, perhaps that ranch Brown had mentioned. Soon enough, paramedics arrived, ushering the rescued children and adults outside, away from the chaos of the warehouse. Carla escorted a boy about 13, who had bruises on his arms and a haunted look in his eyes. As they stepped into the daylight, the boy stared up at the sky in a kind of awe, like he hadn't seen it in days. A pang of anger and sadness flared in Carla's chest. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here." He nodded once, tears welling up. A paramedic helped him into an ambulance for evaluation. Carla stepped aside, letting out a shaky breath. Glancing around the parking lot, she saw deputies counting captives, lining up suspects, bagging evidence from office computers. She spotted Troy talking to Agent Holt near a SWAT van, both conferring over a phone call. Carla hurried over. "Any sign of Naomi Fitz?" Troy shook his head. "Not yet. But we found references to her in their digital records. Orders for shipments, listings of addresses out of state. That means she's a key coordinator. We'll keep looking." Holt held up a phone. "We just got a tip from an employee we interrogated. Fitz might be at the ranch Brown mentioned. He called it Providence Ranch, but apparently the official name is Twin Creeks Ranch. It's in a remote county near the southern border. The Redwood Collective uses it as a major handoff point." Carla set her jaw. "Let's do this. We have to keep going until we shut them down." A few days later, after the Suncorp transport bust, the newly formed task force regrouped for an assault on Twin Creeks Ranch. The rescued victims had given chilling statements about traveling from warehouse to ranch, describing older buildings and armed guards. The Redwood Collective was reeling, but Naomi Fitz remained elusive, a ghost in the network. Rumors placed her at the ranch with the last of their inventory, likely planning a desperate move now that multiple safe houses were compromised. Carla hardly recognized herself in the reflection of the unmarked SUV's window as they drove toward the southern county. The strain of back-to-back raids showed in the shadows under her eyes and the tight line of her mouth. But she was resolute. She thought of Ethan Morales, the kids at Lake Vesper, the frightened faces at Suncorp Transport. Each had reminded her exactly why she pushed herself this hard. The SUV rattled over a dirt road that stretched into flat, scrubby land, dotted with sparse trees and barbed wire fences. Troy sat beside her, fielding radio updates. Agent Holt rode in a separate vehicle, coordinating with local deputies. The plan was much like before: surround the ranch, watch for movements, and strike at dawn when the suspects were likely disoriented. Twin Creeks Ranch was bigger than Carla expected: multiple old barns, a sprawling single-story main house, and a few smaller outbuildings scattered around. From a distance, it looked like a faded cattle operation. One of Holt's agents had used a drone the night before, spotting at least 2 armed guards patrolling the grounds. Lights from a large barn glowed all night, indicating activity inside. They parked in a shallow gulch, using the terrain for cover. The night was moonless, the sky a sweep of brilliant stars. Officers double-checked weapons, radios, and gear. Carla felt the nerves twist inside her. This was the Redwood Collective's last stronghold, if the intel was right. She couldn't allow them to relocate any captives. Just before dawn, the team fanned out around the ranch, a ring of silent figures blending into the terrain. Carla and Troy took position behind a dilapidated wooden fence, scanning the barn through night vision goggles. She spotted movement near the side door, a tall figure, possibly a guard, smoking a cigarette. At the scheduled moment, the hush exploded into coordinated action. Deputies cut padlocks on a side gate, SWAT vehicles rumbled up to the main driveway, sirens blazing. Over loudspeakers, they announced, "Law enforcement. Come out with your hands up." Shots erupted from the barn. Carla flinched as bullets thwacked into the dusty ground near her feet. She ducked behind the fence, adrenaline rushing through her veins. Peering through a gap, she fired back, driving the shooter into hiding. Troy shouted for her to advance, and they moved swiftly across open ground, hearts hammering. Deputies swarmed the porch of the main house, smashing a window to toss in a flashbang. Carla heard the deafening pop, followed by shouts and the crash of a door being kicked in. She stuck to the barn, suspecting that was where they held captives. Another wave of gunfire came from inside, muzzle flashes illuminating hay bales and old machinery. She glimpsed a woman's silhouette, slender, hair tied back, firing a handgun from behind a tractor. "Naomi Fitz." Carla shouted over the din, "Put your weapon down." Her voice echoed in the cavernous barn, merging with the frantic whinnies of spooked horses. The figure spun and fired, the bullet pinging off a metal beam. Carla and Troy dove behind a stack of crates. From the corner of her eye, Carla saw another deputy circling around to flank Fitz, who realized she was cornered. She tried to slip through a side door, but Carla sprinted, intercepting her. Fitz raised her gun again. Carla fired twice, hitting Fitz in the shoulder. With a cry, Fitz collapsed, dropping the weapon. Deputies rushed in, disarming her and applying pressure to the wound to prevent her from bleeding out. Ignoring her own trembling limbs, Carla swept deeper into the barn. In a rear corner, she found a locked enclosure built from hastily nailed boards. She forced it open, discovering 2 teenage boys and a younger girl. They recoiled at the commotion, fear lighting their eyes, but Carla quickly holstered her weapon and lifted her hands in a gesture of calm. "It's okay, police. You're safe." Troy arrived with bolt cutters, snapping chains on another partition. 3 more people, 1 an older teen, 2 adult women, emerged, eyes wide with relief at seeing uniforms. Carla waved them toward the open barn door, guiding them past the scattered bullet casings and pinned-down suspects. The stench of old hay, gasoline, and gunpowder formed a nauseating mix, but Carla pushed through. Outside, the dawn revealed the ranch in full. Some Redwood Collective members had already thrown down their weapons, surrendering to SWAT. Others lay wounded or pinned on the ground. Officer after officer emerged from the house, calling out, "Clear." No sign of any more hostages inside the main residence. Carla spotted Agent Holt conferring with the lead SWAT commander near a battered pickup truck. Fitz was being carried out on a stretcher, her face twisted in pain as paramedics tried to stabilize her. Carla's gaze fixed on the infamous organizer who had viewed children as mere cargo. In that moment, Carla felt neither pity nor glee, only relief that it was over, and a deep, simmering rage at what Fitz had done. Paramedics escorted the newly freed captives to waiting ambulances. A tearful teenage boy clutched Carla's arm in gratitude as they passed. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling. Carla nodded, her own eyes wet, murmuring, "You're safe now." She repeated that phrase so many times during these rescues, and each time it hit her with fresh force. After an hour of securing the scene, rounding up suspects, and attending to the wounded, Carla found a quiet moment by a paddock fence. Her muscles felt leaden from adrenaline withdrawal, and her ears still rang from the gunfire. Troy approached, removing his tactical helmet and wiping sweat from his brow. He let out a breath. "We got them. Redwood Collective is done, at least here. Naomi Fitz is in custody, the rest are locked up. And we found more trafficking records in the house. Enough to put them away for good." Carla stared at the golden sun just peeking above the horizon. She remembered the first moment she laid eyes on Ethan in that sedan, how he clutched his baseball cap in silent terror. This entire odyssey stemmed from that single traffic stop. "It's over," she said quietly as if testing the words. "Or, as close as it can be. We know it's bigger than just one ring. But we stopped this part." Troy gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did good, Carla. A lot of kids are alive and free because you followed your instincts." She turned to face him, eyes moist. "Because we followed them," she corrected, voice wavering. "I couldn't have done this alone." Later that day, back at the station, Carla and Troy helped process the mountain of paperwork that followed a large-scale bust. Agent Holt left with her team, taking Naomi Fitz and the Redwood Collective suspects into federal custody. The newly freed survivors were given medical care, counseling, and steps to reunite them with families where possible. Carla couldn't push away the heaviness in her chest, knowing that many of them faced a lifetime of healing after such trauma. Yet she took solace in the fact they'd been spared worse horrors. In the midst of this whirlwind, Carla received a call from Carmen Morales, who had heard about the final raid on the news. Carmen's voice shook with emotion as she thanked Carla once more, pointing out how none of this would have happened if Carla hadn't noticed Ethan's fear that fateful night. Carla nodded, tears burning her eyes. "He saved more kids than we'll ever know," she said softly, just by being brave enough to whisper for help. Several days later, on her first real day off in what felt like months, Carla found herself back in Willow Bend's small park. She had come to clear her head, maybe walk a lap around the pond. But as she sat on a weathered bench, she saw a familiar figure, Ethan Morales, tossing a baseball with his father under the mild afternoon sun. She hesitated, not wanting to interrupt, but then Ethan noticed her and waved excitedly. She smiled, heart lifting. Daniel grinned, nudging Ethan over. "Officer Jackson, it's good to see you," he called. "We heard about the big bust." "Congratulations." Carla nodded, trying not to show how deeply it moved her just to see Ethan having a normal childhood moment. "Thanks. How's everything going?" Ethan beamed, bridging the short distance to stand by Carla's bench. He was taller than she remembered, face bright with newfound confidence. "I joined a local baseball team again," he said, pointing to the cap he had perched on his head, a newer model, but still a symbol of safety. "I'm not scared all the time anymore." Carla felt tears threaten to spill. She cleared her throat, ruffling his hair gently. "I'm so happy for you. You're really brave, you know." He shrugged with a shy smile. "You were brave too that night. Thank you for helping me." She opened her arms, and he hugged her quickly, the baseball clutched in his free hand. "Keep practicing," she said softly. "I want to see you in the majors one day." He gave a small laugh, then jogged back to his dad, resuming their easy toss and catch. Carla watched them for a long moment, soaking in the warmth of a life reclaimed. This, she realized, was why all the sleepless nights, the dangerous raids, the endless reports were worth it. Sighing contentedly, she rose from the bench and made her way out of the park, the late afternoon sun at her back. She didn't know when the next crisis might strike, but for now, one child's joyful laugh was enough. She set her sights on tomorrow with renewed hope and determination, ready for whatever might come next. Because she knew, no matter how vast the darkness, a single light, one simple decision to check on a frightened child, could spark a chain of events that saved countless lives. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the story, give the video a like and subscribe for more.